Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Captain Elizabeth Daly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From South Australia, Trinity College, Blakeview Campus, Smithfield. From New South Wales, Avondale School, Coonabarabong. And from the Northern Territory, Catherine School of the Air Primary Department. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lance Sergeant Joseph Solomonand. Joseph Solomonand was born on the 29th of August 1914 in Hobart, Tasmania, one of 3 children born to Eliza and Coleman Solomonand. Solomonand's father died in 1925, leaving Solomonand's mother to raise Joseph, his brother Jim and sister Molly on her own. During his childhood, the Solomonand family moved to Newbury in central Victoria. After school, Joseph Solomonand, known as Joe to friends and family, worked as a grocer's assistant in the Newbury area and spent time with his sweetheart, Nancy Patton, from nearby Wandong. Solomonand applied to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force in October 1939, not long after the beginning of the war, and a week later began his training for service in the Army. He trained with the newly formed 2nd 7th Infantry Battalion at Puckapunyal, and in December 1939 was promoted to the rank of corporal. In April 1940, he sailed with the 2nd 7th Battalion from Melbourne for service overseas, and after arriving at El Kanatra on the Suez Canal in Egypt, moved to Palestine for further training. In Palestine, the 2nd 7th Battalion, which formed part of the 17th Brigade of the 6th Australian Division, adjusted to the hot desert conditions. During this period, Solomonand was again promoted, this time to the rank of Lance Sergeant. In November 1940, after a brief period in hospital, Solomonand joined his unit as it was transferred from Palestine to Egypt. They were moving west to continue the attack on Italian forces near the Libyan border. The Australian forces of the 6th Division were brought to the Egyptian-Libyan border for the planned attack on Bardia, an important Italian-held Libyan seaport on the Mediterranean coast. Bardia was well defended by the Italian forces, surrounded by extensive barbed wire lines, anti-tank ditches, and concrete machine gun posts. At 5:30 a.m. on the 3rd of January 1941, Australian troops of the 6th Division, supported by British tanks, attacked the Italian lines and soon managed to breach the initial defences. Solomonand's unit formed part of the southern part of the Australian advance and took part in the heavy fighting. The battle was a resounding success for Allied forces who, between the 3rd and 5th of January, captured their objectives and 40,000 Italian prisoners of war. Solomonand was in the thick of the fighting during the first 2 days of the battle. On the 3rd of January, a splinter from an Italian shell split a grenade that Solomonand was carrying in his pocket in half without detonating it. Solomonand joked to one of his comrades, "They'll never get me." That night, another Italian grenade landed almost between his legs, but did not detonate properly and only slightly wounded him. The following day, on the 4th of January 1941, Solomonand and his company attempted to attack an Italian post by using some nearby abandoned Italian weapons thrown on the battlefield. As they attempted to do this, they came under enemy machine gun fire. Solomonand returned fire with his rifle and managed to hit the machine gunner, but as he raised his rifle to search for a new gunner, he was shot through the head and killed instantly. He was 26 years old. He is buried in the Hafaya Solom War Cemetery in Egypt, where over 2,000 Commonwealth soldiers of the Second World War now lie. His grave reads, "A dearly loved son and brother, deeply mourned." His family left numerous messages of mourning and memorial in local newspapers. His sweetheart Nancy wrote, "We are but parted for a little while." His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is one but many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Sergeant Joseph Solomonand, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.